Three, two, one. Hello, Katrina. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Okay. Hi, Marty. Nice to meet you. Nice to see
You
you.
too. You too. You too. And for anybody listening who isn't yet familiar with who you are and what you do, can you introduce yourself a little bit to us?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm Katrina Gallagher. I do digital marketing. I specialize in analytics. So things like Looker Studio, Google Analytics, and that type of thing. WordPress optimization and SEO. Kind of very, very technical digital marketing. So that's what I normally do. But this year I started writing. Well, I've been writing children's books, but this year I've published a children's book, and it's for babies and toddlers, and it's in English and Spanish.
Perfect. Perfect. And can you tell us a little bit more about the background behind why you decided to do that, or maybe how you got started with Spanish yourself in the first place and how that idea grew with you?
Sure. Okay. So my parents taught me a little bits of French when I was little. I my first language learning um sort of educational experience was with Muzzy from the BBC. It's still going, actually. They refreshed it and kind of redone the graphics, but so that's from 30 years ago. So I used to watch Muzzy in French, and knew little bits and pieces. And I remember speaking to one of my friends' mums in French, just some basic sentences. And I knew the numbers and things like that. I had a little French English dictionary, a little pocket dictionary I used to like. Then when I went to school, it was Spanish. So I was learning Spanish. And I didn't excel at that. I was okay.
Yeah.
But I wasn't mad into languages. The following, the next language that the school kind of thrust upon me was German, and I just wasn't really interested at all. I was a bit upset that it wasn't French.
Oh,
So I wasn't engaged in that at all, and I really regret that, because German would be a fantastic language to learn. The only thing I know from German is I think it's Ich bin 13 Jahre alt, and that's no longer true. So I'm 13 years old. That's about the only thing I
okay.
remember from German. So hopefully I'll sort of pick bits of it up, as I'm doing the books. But yeah, I was totally not engaged at all, and I was just disappointed that I wasn't doing French, because I felt like, well, I'm not going to learn. I'm not going to use German, so what's the point? So I had no drive to learn it at all. I just messed about, and it wasn't good. I regret that, actually. Um, anyway, I kind of didn't really continue with Spanish or German or French. And a few years later, I was working with a woman who was multilingual, and I thought, God, that would be amazing. It'd be amazing to be multilingual. She knew a few different languages. I think she was Russian, and she was totally fluent in English. And it was just really inspiring. She knew some other languages as well, and I thought, oh, that would be amazing, wouldn't it, if I could learn? And I had, my expectations were not realistic. I thought, I'll learn Spanish this year, I'll learn French next year, I'll
Yeah.
learn German the following
Yeah.
year. I'd be fluent in all those languages if I just do it a year at a time. But so I went back to college and did Spanish. I did a Spanish course. I actually went in thinking that I'd be able to pick up where I left off. I'd completed my GCSEs. That's the sort of the English standard at the time. I thought, well, I'll do the next level up, which is A level. She asked me a couple of questions, and she said, when did you do your GCSE? And I said, well, it was about 10 years ago. She said, I think it would be a good idea if you just kind of redid it as a bit of a refresher. So I redid my GCSEs as an adult. And then I had in mind that I'd continue with the college, but the more I looked into it, I found Institute Cervantes, and they've got a centre in Manchester. So I did my my next course there in the evenings. It was quite hard because after a long day at work, I was working at the time, and I was always hungry when I was doing those lessons. But it was really good. I kept feeling like I was getting a little bit better, but I was never really getting over that hump of the verb conjugations. Um, I felt like I was never really getting that. Um, and other things that I'd been doing were other things that I'd tried was Duolingo, which was really good because that's a nice kind of structured progression and slow, low, quite low. You don't have to work very hard at it to keep going, and you can keep your progress doing a tiny little bit each day. So that was really good, and I think that really helped with uh, my accuracy. But my fluency has always been terrible because I've been very nervous about speaking Spanish, like speaking other languages. So another thing that I did was did these conversation exchanges. So I met up with some Spanish people who wanted to learn English, and we just swap. And the best time ever was there was a guy who was not confident enough to speak English, so we spoke Spanish all the time. And I said, "Do you want to swap over?" He's like, "No, no, no, this is fine." So I just got loads and loads of practice then. So that was really good. Um, but
Good for
and I
you.
made loads of friends as well doing that. Some really lovely people doing that, and had some amazing experiences. It was much more rich than just a language learning app or a course.
Mm,
So that was great. Um, Let me think. What else have I done? I guess the one thing that has kind of helped improve my fluency a little bit is I've kind of tried to learn the words to Despacito by Louis Fonsi.
nice, nice.
So I listen to that in the car sometimes, and I can sort of sing along to bits of it until it gets fast, and that's when I just do the bit.
Yeah, that's when you just
Uh,
listen.
yes, exactly, and just enjoy it. So, yeah, and then started writing the books. Uh, the reason for the book was my friend Fiona and her husband Alan. They had a baby, and Fiona's half Colombian, and I knew that they wanted to bring their child up as bilingual. So I thought I was I was just thinking I could make a little book for them for them for the baby. And I thought, well, it could be a bilingual baby book. And I was looking around, there wasn't really anything that was sort of bilingual English and Spanish. So and he's called Harry. So I thought, hello, Harry. And it sort of seemed to have a nice ring to it. So I wrote the book um for Harry, and kind of, but as I was doing it, I was thinking this might actually be a book that other people might like as well. So I wrote it for her and got it all ready for her. And I knew I had quite a strict deadline because I wanted to, I've written baby books before, I've written books before, but I've never got them over the line and published them. I've never got them finished. There's something that's been stopping me from getting it
Mm,
completed. But this time I knew I had a tight deadline because it's a baby book. I want to write this baby book and for it to be there for him while he's still a baby. So I know I need to be quick with this. So I got it done. And then I published it, and I had quite a lot of really good feedback from other people. I started thinking that, well, while I was picking the words for it, there were so many things that, so many useful words that I had to sort of trim out of it. I started thinking, well, I could do other themes, like little themes books. So I've done an animals theme. That's the next book that I published. And then one I'm working on at the moment, which is nearly finished, is a Halloween themed book. So yeah, so that's quite interesting. Picking sort of ideas for the illustrations for a Halloween book for
mm,
babies that isn't too scary is
yeah.
is a bit of a challenge. But I've learned a lot while I've been writing the books and while I've been speaking to Spanish people while I've been kind of marketing the book and um, proofreading it and getting it checked. And I did an audiobook for Ola Harry. So that's played. I got that kind of ready, and we took it with us on holiday. So that was played in the hire car on repeat over and over again because my son kept asking for it. So some of the words in Ola Harry that were kind of a bit fuzzy for me are kind of solidified. So that's been quite good. And then I guess with with my son, he's learning bits of Spanish at nursery. So they've been brilliant teaching him colors and various different words, shapes and things, just basic words in Spanish. They've been fantastic. And so to kind of keep up with that, to kind of support him with that, I've been putting on things like Spanish nursery rhymes. I really love canticos. I don't know if you've heard of that one.
I don't think so.
Canticos, they do it's in English and Spanish. They do the song in English and then
Okay.
they do it in Spanish or vice versa. And they're really lovely. They're really sweet. They've got some nice animations too. We listen to it most of the time, but sometimes we put the animations on. And that's been lovely. And I've been picking up more of the words while I've been listening to that too. So lots of different things. It's kind of a bit of a scattergun approach, really. I don't have a sort of a solid strategy that I've thought
Yeah.
out. It's just been a bit here and a bit there.
But it's perfect, and it sounds like you said at the very end here that you've also learned a lot with it, and I believe that you brought up some really incredible points here. First of all, I want to come back to the very beginning of what you started talking about, that you never really felt like you were a language person, because I feel like that's the misconception that a lot of people have, that, oh, I'm just not a language person, so I'm not supposed to learn. And oh, all of these other people are just language people and that's why they can speak it well. But
Mhm,
like you said, obviously balancing that with realistic expectations. But it's not
mhm,
that, oh, okay, I should never ever learn. Maybe it's
mhm,
going to take me a little bit more time. Maybe I'm going to have to use some different materials, but I can get there in the end, even publish a book in that language potentially sometime in the future. So
mhm,
all roads might not maybe lead to Rome, but they do intersect potentially. So I really love that point that you mentioned. And I really also found it very beneficial what you mentioned at the beginning, that you weren't really motivated to learn German, and that's why it wasn't really something that stuck for you, versus with French, it was something that you just enjoyed. And that's
mhm,
what I'm assuming made it easier, maybe to
mhm,
acquire, to learn, to practice, versus with German, it just wasn't your thing. And so trying to force yourself into it wasn't really a great strategy. Like you said, that's what schools tend to do. And on the one hand, that's very disappointing because, oh, you have to learn this, but then everybody feels a little bit differently about that language. Maybe some people like it, some people don't, and so it's not the most effective probably approach. But like you said, having that motivation behind it, even what you said with the book, that you had some kind of, okay, I have to do this. Having motivation, I suppose, whether internal or external, seems to be a big factor.
definitely, yeah. So I think it's the combination. When I was very young, I was enjoying the French.
Hmm.
Um, and when I was and now um I feel like I've got a reason to do it, and like I really would love to be able to be fluent and have great conversations and understand it and be quick enough as well. So a lot of the times I'm just not I don't pick it up quick enough. I can't have a fluent conversation just yet. I can get by, and I can ask people to slow down for me a little bit. But I'm not there. I'm not at the level I want to be, and that can be really frustrating. It can be really demotivating. But I'm just going to stick. I've just started thinking it doesn't matter if I'm just at the level of my um, babies and toddlers. If I just
Yeah.
progress with them, I'm still progressing.
Exactly. Definitely. And what would you say has been in your personal journey the biggest aha or perhaps the biggest jump that you've had? Because you mentioned those conversation exchanges, and from a lot of the people that I've spoken to, many people very much like that and they find it very beneficial. Would you say that was the biggest push for you potentially, or for your level maybe more so, or has it been something else too?
I think that has well, I listened to Michelle Thomas, and
Mm,
this is crazy because he's not even Spanish. Well,
no.
he wasn't Spanish, but
Yeah.
his I used to listen to those in the car all the time on the way to work and back, and that really helped. Kind of just subconsciously, I'm picking it all up. That's really helped. But the hardest thing to do is, out of everything that I've done, is have those conversations, have those like real life conversations with other human beings. Because I'm a little bit shy myself. It's the hardest thing to do, but it is the most valuable part of the language learning. It's how you remember it more, especially if you get something wrong and then you correct it. It really sticks in your mind. It's much more memorable. It's much more emotional, and it's sort of um, it's just in comparison to sort of a couple of clicks on Duolingo, it's just a totally different level. It goes into your brain, I'm sure, in a much stronger fashion when you're speaking to a human being, and you've got that nervousness of getting it wrong and making mistakes, and did I say did I get that over the line, and trying to sort of gauge from their opinion. And when you see them, nodding along, and like they understand you and you understand them, it's such an amazing moment. It's an amazing feeling to have even just a short conversation. So that is, it's definitely the hardest thing that I have found from language learning. But that's the point of it, isn't it?
No.
You're learning the language so that you can speak it. So if you're not actually doing that part of it, it's sort of so abstract, that it's just going to take you so much longer to get there if you're just not practicing it.
That was a really great comparison with what you said with Duolingo, that you're just pressing things versus, like you said,
Mm,
actually looking at other people's facial expressions. Like you said, are they nodding? Are they frowning? Are they
mm.
no? And it does happen sometimes, but I wonder if you can dig a little bit deeper into what you said, because I really, really liked what you said here, that you do get that nervousness and you do get those maybe butterflies in your stomach of, is that
Mm,
making sense? Am I even using the right words, or is it just complete gibberish? Would you
mm.
say that that is perhaps something that you seek, that nervousness, that, ooh, is this gonna work? Would you say that that's something that you've learned to maybe appreciate, or not so
I
much?
appreciate it, but I still hide away from it a lot. Like, a lot of the staff at the nursery, they're Spanish, and I want to speak to them in Spanish, but I can't
Mm,
bring myself to them sometimes. And there was a lady that had just joined, and her English wasn't as strong, and I found it really easy speaking to her
mm.
in Spanish. But her English is great now, so I'm too shy to do it now.
Oh,
So
definitely, definitely. But that's something that
it
I
makes it
hear
much
from a lot
easier.
of people as well, that if I'm speaking to non-native speakers, it's so much easier than speaking to native speakers. So I suppose that makes sense.
I find it easier speaking Spanish to somebody who doesn't know the English, because you don't have that safety net. You can't fall back
Ah,
on it. You don't go back
okay.
into it. And also you kind of you've got to, and yeah, it's much easier for me, it's much easier to speak to a Spanish person if their English is terrible. So, but
Okay.
that's hard to find in the UK. So
Just
yeah.
jumping into the deep end and hoping for the best.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Okay. Okay. But that's another good external motivator, I would say, if you literally cannot go back into English, because like you said, I feel like it's so easy to switch that, oh, how do you say that word? And okay, let's just speak in English. But if you
Mm,
can't, then okay, well, here it goes. So
yeah.
that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. And would you say that builds you up also when you do have those conversations that you notice in yourself that, oh, I can do this? It's not really
Mm,
as hard maybe as I thought it would be. Does that
yeah.
give you a little bit of that confidence boost as
It
well?
does. Definitely, definitely. Even when I get it wrong, even when I make mistakes, sometimes they're quite funny and they just stick in my mind.
Yeah.
For example, I was ordering some food, and the waitress said, this is in Spain. The waitress had told me the list of food, and I understood and knew she'd said meatballs, but then when it came to ordering, I couldn't remember the word for it. So it
Mm.
had gone in, but then I couldn't find the Spanish for it. So I just started saying pelotas instead. So like pelotas, which is balls, but there's like footballs. And she just laughed because I don't think they don't. It's not a literal translation. So
Yeah.
she just laughed. She knew what I meant, but yeah, it was uh yeah. So it was that stuck in my mind. Um, and I can never pronounce it, but abogandas, I think is the
Okay.
word. I said pelotas, and she just laughed and she said, "Oh, okay." And
All right.
she just yeah, pelotas de carne. I was trying to say, which is a literal translation of
Mm.
meatballs, but yeah, they don't say that.
No.
So,
But now you remember it very well, I suppose.
kind of, yeah. I need to. The word is, I think, because it's a slightly longer word, it's still not in there
Mm.
yet. So abogandas. It's something like that.
Okay. Okay. But it's incredible, like what you're describing here, that it's not even things that you learn on purpose, that you sit down with the textbook and okay, these are meatballs or lasagna or whatever, but it's something that just comes up in, oh, real life situation. And like you said, some words, and I really, really love that experience that you don't know a word, but you hear it and you just instinctively understand it, whether it's similar to English or maybe French in your case, if you remember still a little bit of it, then you're like, oh, okay, I get that. But then it's
Mm,
that production that nope.
mm.
That doesn't always work, so that's very interesting.
Yeah, I definitely understand more than I can say.
Would you say
Mm.
that's because of the lack of practice, perhaps, that you have, or where do you think that comes from?
Practice and confidence.
Mm, definitely,
Mm.
definitely. Okay. And I also asked you about this last time that we spoke, but I would really love to go a little bit deeper into what we were talking about because I asked you if you think that it's perhaps essential for children to learn another language, and you said that it's not necessarily essential. It's very beneficial, of course, but maybe it's not essential. Can you tell me or tell us a little bit more about why you think it's helpful for younger children to learn another language?
Yeah, I think it's helpful because at the moment, I mean, I'm looking at my child, and he's learning English at the same time he's learning Spanish, and he's not as concerned about getting it wrong and trying it, and because it's just all part of the process that he's going through with English anyway. So he's just trying it, and he's not really got the self-consciousness that holds me back,
Yeah.
um, from trying it out. He'll just say the word, and um, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. He says the word, and he's not super self-critical of it all at the moment. So I think it's definitely useful to learn when you're younger. And also I think you're learning other skills while you're doing it, because you're you're increasing your vocabulary, and you're thinking of things in different ways, and you're you're understanding that it's not black and white. This isn't just hat. It could be hat or sombrero or bobble hat, or he's thinking of, um it's not just sort of, um yeah, it's just not just as black and white as just this is the word for this. It can have other words and other meanings, I think I mean, ironically, because I'm struggling with my words with this, but you can think of things in other ways and you can get around things.
Have you, or has he perhaps maybe ever run into wanting to say something in English and he just weaves in the Spanish because that's just the first thing that came to mind, or maybe not yet?
He does,
Yeah.
yeah. Sometimes he does, and occasionally he'll he'll sing bits of songs in Spanish. Um, I yeah, I think that's been really nice to see. The first time the first time I thought, oh God, I need to swat up on these Spanish nursery rhymes because he was coming out with things and I had no idea what he's saying. Um, because he's not quite getting the words exactly right,
Mm.
and I don't know the song, so I don't know what he's trying to say. So I asked for a list of the songs from nursery, and they were brilliant. They gave me full pack of A4 with few different Spanish songs that they've been teaching them, and I think he really likes Dos Elefantes. It's where there's an elephant and it's balancing on a spider's web.
Okay,
So
very
it's
interesting.
really it's a really cute one. But he that's one of his favorite nursery rhymes and it's in Spanish. But I didn't know that one before nursery kind of taught it to him. And then I thought, oh, I really need to know
Yeah,
this song.
yeah.
Color song. There's a color song that he really loves, and he knew that, and he knows the words to that, and I've not learned it yet. So that's been really interesting.
And would you say that's been another somewhat internal, I suppose, and both external motivator for you to keep practicing and
Mm.
to keep developing?
Oh, definitely, because I think if he has the exposure and he's if I can put on instead of putting cartoons on in English, if I can put cartoons on in Spanish, he's just going to have so much more of an advantage in learning Spanish and learning languages. I think he might learn a little bit of French with my mom, and because she's had a full year streak on Duolingo, but again she's similar
Guys.
to me. She's quite nervous about speaking to humans.
Mm.
So she's not been doing any practicing, but she started listening to it. So when she's heard French out and about, she's tuning in and she's like, oh, I understand that. So it's starting to click with her, I think.
Do you think it's possible for adults, like you said, whether from your own experience or perhaps with other people in your life that are learning a language, to somewhat maybe shift their minds or their perspective into what you said before, that children just don't really have that self-consciousness that, okay, well, I'm just saying things, I'm making sounds, and hopefully you can understand me. If not, then, I can just use my hands. Do you think, again, whether from your experience or from the people that you know, is it possible for an adult to also create that sense or to develop that kind of mindset, or would you say maybe not so much?
I don't know. I don't know whether you can change your um, self-consciousness. I
Mm.
think sometimes if you're just very shy and you've got some sort of block, I'm not an expert in changing. I'm not Anthony Robbins, and you know, and he's sort of like, if it's possible, you can do it. Anything is possible. But I think changing your own personal feelings about how self-conscious you are and how shy you are. um I think a little bit of practice, you can make baby steps with that. But I think you just start with what you can do, and you'll get there. uh you'll get there eventually, I think. So I don't think I couldn't say, oh, you know um you can do it 100%, just go out and do it.
Yeah,
It's easy to say it, it's harder
of
to
course.
actually do it. It's down to the individual person and their motivations and how much they want it, how much they need to do it as well. So I think if you've got motivating factors, let's say, for example, if you have to move for a job, or you fall in love with someone who speaks a different language and you want to be able to communicate with their parents, so you move to a different country. There's some things where you have to do it, so you're just going to have to do it and you will learn it. But if there's nothing that's making you do it, if you've not got anything that means that you have to do it, you it's just up to you whether, maybe you can push past that, and maybe not. Maybe you just work on what you can work on, and if that is just listening to tapes and using apps and watching TV in your target language and reading books and just sort of surrounding yourself with it. At some point you might get to a point where you understand so much of it that it's just something clicks and it just comes out, maybe. But I don't think you can just change your mindset and just be, oh, I can do this now, so I'm going to go out and speak to I'm just going to speak to everyone in my target language. I think it's a very personal thing. Some people will be able to do that and push past it, and some people just go the route that, go with the flow. That, if it's working for you in a different way, you can do it. You can reach your goals in a different way. Yeah, that's what
Definitely.
I'd say.
And that's a
Mm.
really good point because, like you said, and this is something that I feel like a lot of people get stuck on that, oh, okay, I watched this polyglot and they did XYZ, and so I have to do that. But, well,
Mm.
you're a different person. So you can, of course, nobody's gonna stop you, but you can't really expect to get the exact same results as somebody else simply because you do the same thing as they did. Because, like you said,
Mm.
somebody might be an extrovert and maybe they love the challenge, and some people might be more introverted, more shy, and it just makes everything in your body go numb when you have to do certain
Mm.
things. So you can't expect yourself to be the same as somebody else. But like you said,
Mm.
doing what you can and starting where you can and making those what you were talking about before, those little baby steps. Because
Mm.
even if we consider the alternative of, okay, like you said, maybe if you don't really have a lot of motivation, maybe you don't really have to learn the language, then just don't. And if you don't really like the thought of that, if you don't really like, oh, but I don't want to stop. So then,
Mm.
okay, now we know that you actually want to do it. So how
Mm.
can we get there? What's the best way of getting there? Like you said, starting with apps, starting with listening, starting with just more of the passive acquisition. And
Yeah.
then you can get into, like you said, when you start to understand more, when you start to feel, oh, okay, I get the flow of the language, then pushing yourself up, certainly.
Mm. Yeah, definitely. Because I think a lot of people think it's an all or nothing. Like, if they
Hmm.
can't have those conversations with people, they shouldn't bother at all. But you're still learning. It's still great for your brain, isn't it? Whether you're actually having those conversations or whether you're just understanding it, it's still good for you, isn't it?
What would you say is the influence of having the input real life scenario within your learning? And I mean that in the sense of, I feel like a lot of programs and Duolingo, I guess, is kind of on the fence with this, but having content and having words or having listening stuff that is actually useful and that's actually practical in daily life. Hey, how are you doing? I'm doing this. I really like doing that. I am not a big fan of this thing versus tennis and space and the sun. You're like, okay, well, maybe I can use that, but it's probably not the most practical thing that I could be doing. What would you say is the maybe benefit or the driving force perhaps of having content, of having things to study that are actually genuinely relatable in your life?
Mm. I think that's really key, because if you're learning sort of sentences in a school textbook, I remember, you know, being able to describe myself and list my hobbies, but I wouldn't really say, oh, these are all my hobbies,
No.
day-to-day conversation. And if you can sort of do a sort of a monologue about your hair color and your eye color and
Yeah.
your height, but you can't
Yeah.
ask for um a glass of milk, if you can't say, oh, how are you doing? How are you? And if you can't ask for things, if you can't get what you need in day-to-day life, it's not as, there's not as much point really, is there? You've logged those sentences and that's great. But I think so something that someone suggested, I was following on TikTok, I can't remember who it is now, but they said just write down a sentence that you've used in your day. Just try and remember, if you have a conversation with someone, you're on the phone, try and jot down, what did you say, what did you ask them, and translate that, just a couple of sentences a day of things that you have actually said. And then you'll start to learn how to speak, how you can speak in a different language using the words that you would use. I think that makes a lot of sense. I haven't been doing it, but it's on my list. That's one of the
On the
reasons
to-do.
why. Yes, definitely. One of the reasons why with the first book, I picked out the words that the babies are most likely to need to know, and young children, the first words that they need to know. I've picked out those ones, but they're the most useful. And funnily enough, some of them were words that I didn't know yet. They weren't.
Yeah.
It wasn't vocab that was sort of in yet. So it was useful for me in the process of learning a couple of extra words. But they're words that the babies are most likely to need to learn, need to know in English or Spanish, whatever. They're the first words. I picked those ones out. And then you've got verbs. I'm doing a baby verb book at some point, but that's a little bit later down the line. But I think that's going to really help, because I've always had that problem with verbs. I feel like it's a big hump that sort of at times I feel like I've got over it a little bit. But being able to conjugate verbs, I'm just going to keep it super simple with the baby one, and it's just going to be related to them, like what they would say, like I want, and I love, and I need, or I run, I cry. It's going to be super, super simple. I'm not going to have conjugation tables. It's just going to
Yeah.
be what are the absolute basics that they need to learn just to communicate at the very, very basic level in the early years. So I think I'm looking forward to that, because I think that could really help me with my little hump as well, and improve my fluency. It's a little bit selfish, that one.
Whatever works.
Yeah.
No, but
What were
that
you going
makes
to
a
say?
whole lot of sense. That makes a whole lot of sense, and that's something that I noticed with, like you said, the younger learners versus the adults, that we have a tendency to, like you said, okay, here's a conjugation table, here are the grammar rules, here are the exceptions, versus
Mm.
when you're learning as a child, like you said, whether that's English or Spanish or whatever other language, you don't really learn that way. You rather learn the sentence patterns, that okay, I, like you said, I want, I need, I am, I something, and then you don't need to remember, was it O or A or E, and it's just such a huge mess, versus okay, this is just what it is, and what's the
Yeah,
pattern, I don't know, but it works and it's right and I can use it. So that's really
exactly.
all that counts at the end of the day.
Yeah, and you just pick it up, and it's not like this awful memorization task. You when you're learning a language, you just pick it up. And I'm finding now that my son is teaching me what verbs are irregular in
Oh,
English. But
interesting.
I didn't know this. You don't know it, you just pick it up. You just
Yeah.
instinctively know that it sounds wrong if it's not like this.
Mm.
So he's teaching me the irregular verbs in English. He's
Wow.
not telling me necessarily that this is an
Okay.
irregular verb. But he's coming out with something and I'm saying, oh no, it's this because it's an irregular verb.
Very
Um,
interesting.
I don't know it's an irregular verb until he comes out
Yeah.
with it and it sounds wrong. because you just pick it
Okay.
up, don't you? When
Yeah.
you're learning it as a child, you just pick it up. You don't know this list of things that you've got to
Yeah.
memorize.
Yeah, of course. That makes a lot of sense. And does that give you a, would you say, a greater understanding of English? Does that give you some kind of a maybe a newfound enjoyment of the language?
Oh, totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And while I was learning with, in conversation exchanges, one of the women that I was speaking to, she taught me about phrasal verbs. And I didn't realize
Yeah.
that that was a thing.
Yeah.
English, we've got loads of phrasal verbs. And you don't learn, oh, this is a phrasal verb, and here's a list of phrasal
Yeah.
verbs that you've got to memorize. You just pick it up, don't you? You
Yeah.
just hear it in conversation, and it sounds right or it sounds wrong.
So would you
Yeah,
say
and you
that the
just
best way to do that as an adult, because you mentioned the Michelle Thomas method, and for anybody maybe that's not familiar with it, it's just from my understanding, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I understand it to be is just listening and you're supposed to repeat, but I from what I understand you're not supposed to do any exercises, you're not supposed to do homework, you're not supposed to practice afterwards, and it's just such a very natural approach to it that you just listen and repeat and you don't do any fill in the blanks or anything like that. Would you say that that's a close mimicking of what we're talking about here?
so yeah, I think so. It confused me while I was listening to him because sometimes he would get really frustrated with the male student,
Mhm.
and he'd be like, don't work it out. And you're like, well, if it's not in there, I've got to try and work it out.
Yeah.
He was getting frustrated because of the way he was coming out with it. He was just getting it wrong in some way. And he's saying, no, you don't work it out. You've got to just, I can't remember exactly what he was saying, but he was getting frustrated with him because he was getting it wrong. And he was saying, oh, you don't do it like that. You don't, but how, if it's not in there, it's not going to come out accurately.
Of course, definitely, definitely. And tell me, Katrina, what would you say has been your maybe biggest maybe trick or maybe the biggest tip that you could give to somebody listening that is maybe insecure about their language, or maybe they're not super confident, maybe they're not very motivated in their learning, whether that's English or Spanish or any other language. Do you have any advice that you want to share?
Well, I'd say if you're not particularly motivated, but you need to do it or you want to do it anyway, but you don't feel that motivation, just try and keep it as easy as possible, like low key and maybe in the background, just habitual. So for example, we've got Tony's box. You don't know if you've seen them. Then it's like a little cube. It's like a little speaker, and you put a figure on it, and
Oh, okay.
it plays music. So we've got a Spanish one that we just pop the sleepy Spanish music on every night. And it's just kind of a little habit that's just, you can just listen to it. You don't need to do any exercises. Um, or if you're in the car, just see if you can get just stick a Spanish playlist on. So you're listening to Spanish music or a Spanish podcast, what you're interested in, but in Spanish. Have that on in the background. Just have stuff on in the background. Or watching films in Spanish, or films or cartoons. Kids' cartoons are good because they're slower and
Mm,
a bit more repetitive. So if you're still quite sort of in the early stages, kids TV can be quite useful for that. Peppa Pig in Espanol is really good. They do that in French as well, and some other languages, I think. But that's a really good one. If you can tolerate Peppa Pig, I quite
yeah.
like it. I didn't like Grandpa Pig,
No.
but I've got quite into that now. But stuff that's really easy that you don't mind doing, if you've not got the motivation, just stick it on in the background, and maybe it'll come at a later date. But don't force it. I don't think
Like what
that's
we
what
were
I would
talking
say.
about before, the realistic expectations.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Mm.
Certainly, certainly. And for anybody that wants to listen to more of your wisdom, to more of your words, whether in English or in Spanish, where could people find you?
So for anything sort of related to Spanish and the children's books. It's boohq.com. That's my website. And you can follow me on different social channels. So I'm on TikTok and Instagram and Facebook and that type of thing. And I'll just show you that one's one of my
Oh,
books.
very
That one,
nice.
the other book. So this one's my first one. So this is kind of all kind of very simple words, like the first words that you might learn. And this one's just all about animals. I'm doing a Halloween one coming up. But those books, they're available on Amazon and Barnes and Noble. I've got one audiobook out on Audible, and the ebooks are out in various places as well. So yeah, you could check it out. Check it out if you're interested in that type of thing. But boohq.com is my website, and then you can see the links to all of those different things.
We're gonna have everything in the links below for anybody that's interested. And tell me, Katrina,
Brilliant.
is there anything else that you would like to add? Any last words?
Um, I can't think of anything.
No?
Is that no, no?
Oh, good, good. It's always the most stressful moment that, oh no, is there anything that I should say, anything that I forgot about? But no, I think we were perfect.
No. I guess related to that, don't worry if your mind goes blank. It happens sometimes. Happens to us all, even when you're speaking in English. But
It's a
yeah,
very, very
thank you
good
so much
lesson.
for having me on and talking to me about this. It's been really interesting, and I've watched some of your previous videos, and yeah, you've got some fantastic resources. It's really interesting.
Thank you very much. I very much appreciate that. And it was a pleasure talking to you today as well. I really, really appreciated your time, and hopefully we can stay in touch.
Yeah, that'd be lovely. Okay, thanks so much, Marty.
Thank you. Hey, I'm glad to see you here. Let me know what you most enjoyed about this conversation, and if you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. I'll see you in the next one. Do zobaczenia.